Hello, hello. We are ESM. I'm Brina.
I'm Mary.
I'm Keely.
And I'm Kevin.
And we're here to talk about preparing for AP success. Why take an AP exam? Even if you're registered for the class and registered for the exam, what does the exam do? Kevin, can you speak to that?
I'll jump in. For many students, the AP exam is either a part, something you discuss often in the class and you prepare for it, or sometimes it's not something that you may discuss because it may not be seen as a necessity because it's not part of your grade or something like that. It doesn't help your GPA. But learning how to prepare for an AP exam teaches you a lot of academic and study skills that go along with things like SAT and ACT prep that are separate from what you do in class when you're preparing for content mastery. So that is one benefit. Is you learn a lot of skills in a very short period of time that you can use in college and beyond, because test taking is a skill that people use all across the board, not just for school, because everywhere we get tests. There's also credit potentially. And the benefit of getting college credit is that it can shave off time, which then shaves off money. I'm an example of that. I took about 10 exams and I was able to shave a year off of my 4-year degree. So that was the bigger benefit, that beyond just the scores themselves, even though some of them were great, some of them weren't so great, they all added up. So there is a benefit to taking even multiple exams if you're taking those AP classes.
And even if you're not looking to shave off time from your degree, sometimes there can be an advantage of not having to take the general intro class for a course in your freshman year, particularly for classes that are not in your major. Like, you can jump to a more interesting first class rather than the general one. A lot of my students have enjoyed, especially skipping out of the general intro comp class, intro composition, by taking that AP exam.
Now we're going to get into some specifics. The AP exams cover a wide range of topics. If you log on to the College Board website, you'll see a huge list of topics. We've put them into some smaller chunks to talk about them in more detail.
And I talked a lot about the humanities exam because I kind of specialize more in those. So for those of you taking either English or US history, world history, uh, Euro history, those are often some of the ones you start with because it's a good introduction to the AP structure and format, not just the content. But within the content for humanities, there's just what you would see for any other humanities class. Lots of reading and writing. Both the multiple choice section and the free response section involve heavy reading comprehension. You need to know what they're talking about. So your vocabulary is critical. If you don't know what they mean when they ask a question, or when they put in the answer choice, it's going to be very difficult to use the test design to your advantage. So those areas are tantamount. After that, it's really just practicing the language, getting accustomed to the way that the questions are structured, the way that the answer choices are styled. When you have 4 potential answer choices, how do I narrow it down? How do I know that 2 are definitely wrong and these 2, one is close to right, and how do I invalidate the one so I know that the one that I'm choosing is correct, is actually correct? That is a skill in and of itself, and something that must be practiced because we're not necessarily trained to do that when we're learning the content specifically. So that is also very helpful, especially with the humanities. And then with the essays, you are given a rubric. So learning how to read and understand rubrics and expectations so you can structure your writing in a timed environment very efficiently and give them exactly what they're looking for is what you need to practice as well. That's very important. Some of the humanities exams, particularly the languages ones, will have something to do with communication or language or interpreting or an oral section. That is not universal. But so look into each individual exam you'll be taking and figure out what's going to separate it from others that are more generally just the MCQ, FRQ type of structure. And then, of course, you'll be working in history. So there's a lot of historical and cultural thinking skills that go along with that. But I would link that back up to vocabulary. Pay attention to what words mean when they say them in this context.
Awesome. And then there are the STEM exams, which cover quite a broad range of topics as well. We're going to talk specifically about the sciences, AP Chem and Bio, and the math classes, calculus, AB and BC, statistics, and pre-calc. Pre-calc is new this year, so that's a big deal. On these exams, the passage-based reading comprehension, it's easy to think that if it's STEM, it's not language, but it's still very, very much a reading test. You have to read what's on the page and understand the goal of each question, the goal of each type of question. Keely, can you speak about?
Yeah, so on the biology and chemistry tests, especially the longer questions are presented as a passage. And even there's sometimes some multiple choice questions that are longer reading chunks, but especially the FRQs at the end, the longer questions where you're writing out an answer, you have a passage to make sense of, and you're really thinking about why are they giving me this information? What are they trying to lead up to, even before you get to the questions, so that you're focusing on the right information. So it's reading comprehension, but it's specifically thinking a test reading comprehension, thinking about like, why is this information important for asking a question? What are they asking me to focus on? I should also say that on these tests, there's vocabulary building that's important. Obviously, you need to know the content area vocabulary. That's essential. You also need to know the vocabulary that is typically used on these tests. It's used in a very specific way. Especially for the sciences tests, you should look up task verbs on the AP website. These are words used in the questions like explain, predict, design an experiment. You should know exactly what those words are telling you in terms of what you need to get in your answer to address the question. The goal in writing these essays is not to write a true essay. You're trying to get exactly the information they're asking for into your answer as concisely as possible. And so it's important to know exactly like how much information they need based on those task verbs, which have a pretty specific meaning to the AP exams.
Sometimes students feel like in order for them to demonstrate their understanding of a concept especially in AP chemistry, they need to write a lot. So I do want to emphasize Keely's point about conciseness. I find that even on questions that ask students to justify their answers in AP chemistry, really, honestly, no more than 3 sentences are needed. The more concise that you can write, the better, because actually what can happen is that if you write too much and it's very clear that you don't understand what the question is asking, that you can be docked off points. So I just want to reiterate the importance of conciseness when answering those questions in the AP science tests.
Yes, it's very key that you can lose points if you say something wrong in an answer where you had already ticked the boxes for the correct things to say. They have to read the whole thing that you wrote, and if you kind of go off topic and you state something that's like very factually incorrect but sort of pertinent to the question, they can choose to dock points for that. So you don't want to be adding a bunch of extraneous information. You want to directly answer the question and move on. There was a point in time where these were more essays. That was over a decade ago. They're very concise in what they expect now. Even then, they were like paragraphs, but as Mary said, 3 sentences at most for the most elaborate answers.
This also sort of applies to the free response on the AP Calc sequence. Those are sort of reading comprehension, but very, very short and very, very specific. You can underline keywords throughout the question, and almost treat it like a checklist. You will use every piece of information in some part of the multi-part free response question answer. And the multiple choice strategy and approach is a little bit different, yet you're still looking for keywords, you're still using the answer choices very much. You're eliminating wrong answers, but on calculus specifically, the wrong answer choices are very enticing, and sometimes they do some algebraic simplification that isn't intuitive and isn't obvious from the beginning of the question. So you do want to actually solve the question and pay attention to details. The types of mistakes are misunderstanding a specific keyword, like just going down a wrong path, or messing up parentheses or a negative, like not distributing a negative somewhere. The mistakes are small. So make sure that you're really doing the work, putting in the details, even on multiple choice questions. And that does
Wraps up the AP STEM exams.
the AP exams, they include these other exams as well. If you do go onto the AP exam website, you'll see a huge list, and it does include these as well. Probably you're already registered for the exams that you're going to take this spring, but maybe you're looking at options for next year and trying to decide what to do next year. So do look into these, do talk to your college advisor, college counselor about these other options as well. And study tips and strategies.
I like to jump in because first and foremost, I think the thing that's not listed is start early. Start as early as possible. Some people tend to wait until a few months or 2 months because for some tests you can do that. For these, when you are preparing to learn each unit, I recommend incorporating some exam prep into your study consistently. And that just means taking whatever concepts you're being taught and placing them or practicing multiple choice questions or looking in at least different pre-response constructive responses or long-term responses and seeing what's expected and how you're going to have to present that information. So start early when you start studying. Just how should this be on the exam so that you're familiarizing yourself with it consistently.
And using and updating notes and study materials, that is included in that very much so. Probably have a vocab list of your own for each class. Like jot down the content specific vocabulary and what actions it tells you to do. And you will be updating that still over the next month and a half, 2 months. You'll still be adding to that, but it is not too early to do practice questions, and it is not too early to start writing that.
I should add that for tests that have been around a long time, like the most popular ones like biology, chemistry, the calc exams, there's, or the calculus, not the pre-calc exams, there are lots of past test papers that you can review, but there's a lot more FRQs available typically than MCQs. And you have to note that much older tests usually have some differences in format from the modern test. You can look up, like, for any given test that you're taking, like, when was the last time they did a big curriculum change to this class? And then generally tests from before that are going to be less accurate to your experience on the official test. For instance, AP Biology went through a huge rewrite in 2013, and I don't generally use tests from before that for our main study focus for students, although pieces of some of those older tests can be useful. There's been some more recent updates to AP Biology, which are smaller. There was a huge rewrite in 2013, and there's a bunch of stuff that's not on the test anymore that are in some of those old tests, so they can throw you off when you're studying. Another thing is that the College Board has locked up some of their practice MCQs in AP Classroom, which is an online system that we cannot give you access to. Your teacher who is teaching the class you are registered for is the one who can give you access to AP Classroom. It varies in its usefulness across different tests and different classes. But if you want access to the maximum amount of like official College Board material, which I would recommend getting if you can, you're going to want access to that. Some teachers are using it throughout the year in their classes. And so you've already been on AP Classroom. Some teachers never touch it. And so they don't even tell you how to log in or don't even give you your logins. But they should have access to those. So it is something to pester your teacher about if you haven't ever gotten into AP Classroom to see if there are additional materials in there that are useful to you.
And we can help as well. We have an upcoming webinar sequence that is more specific to individual tests. We'll have a 2-hour webinar for each test that you can log into and you can register for. We'll have practice tests available, scored practice tests, so you will get feedback. And you can find all of that information and upcoming options, upcoming opportunities at this link, esmprep.com/AP.
I should note this is not for every AP test. It's for the 8 most popular tests. So if you're in one of the big ones like Calc, Bio, the big history ones, that's what's going to be covered here. Although please contact us if there's a AP class that isn't covered here. Like we can still work with you as a on tutoring, but there's webinars for the 8 most popular tests. And please register even if you aren't able to make the time and be present for the live webinar. It's super useful if you can be there because then you can ask questions. But even if you don't attend, you can watch the webinar later and you will still get access to that free practice test for having registered for the webinar, whether you're able to attend or not.
All right, we're going to open up to any questions, and probably we won't stick along terribly long after this.
One thing I'd like to address, having been a special ed teacher, is accommodations. And a lot of people think sometimes they forget that AP exams, like the SAT tests, you can get accommodations. And usually with the APs, they're around timing because some people may need breaks or kind of like stop the clock breaks. So you don't get extra time, but you do get chunks of time where you can just take the test off and go like, clear your mind or run around the room for a second, whatever you got to do to take a break. And so there are a list of those that are available to students that don't change the content whatsoever. So that's the biggest thing. So if you are one of those students, you can find either go through your school or go online to the College Board website and learn yourself how to submit paperwork and requests for official accommodations. Because when you have them with the College Board, it extends to most all of their tests.
We do have a question. Are there several sessions for these AP specific study seminars? We have scheduled a single 2-hour session for each of these main AP tests, and then the practice tests and the study materials. And then we have another like cram session, another scheduled live webinar closer to the date. If neither of those times work for you, if neither of those work in your schedule, you can absolutely access the recordings and you can meet with somebody who can meet with you one-on-one and get you specific help that's tailored to you. Awesome. Okay. I think many people were planning on watching the recording of this. I'm sorry you couldn't answer, you couldn't ask questions live. please feel free to still email us, anybody at ESM, and we'll try to get your questions answered. So if you weren't able to attend this live and you weren't able to ask your questions live, you can still ask your questions.